Sweet bloody X, some shit went down with Cobra Kai Season 4, did it not? This series has somehow been on a momental upward spike in writing and fan service, and just giving the fans what they want, plus bleeding their eyes out when the moment really calls for it ever since its inception back in 2018. And I must stress, there is no reason why this show should be as good as it is! Every character continues to venture out between the gray area with unexpected wrinkles, thus giving everyone more agency, and within the complicated web of plot points and character arcs, it makes almost every choice the characters do matter, especially since most of them bypass dumb teenager syndrome and neatly avoid diving into the stupid pool. Every episode continues to build off the previous one, the structure is definitely streamlined to where detours are allowed if it builds to the outcome in the end. The series continues to be delightfully corny and cheesy, but ratchets up the pressure and intensity the closer we get to the All Valley, and they don't make it any clearer with its musical interludes. I could gush over that ranchy pumping soundtrack and its rather haunting musical interludes for days. The tone is more really consistent throughout, with despite some wonky pacing, but while the fight scenes are about as visual and visually entertaining as before, they do make sure to save the absolute best for last. That doesn't mean the season is perfect though. I mean, to be fair, none of them are. My biggest issue with this season is just having way too many plot threads and storylines crammed in at once and barely having any time to develop. Parameters surrounding how effortlessly fast or slow some scenes play out become more apparent when the stories are just developing, and some storylines that feel like they should go in a certain direction to elevate certain states are either briefly touched upon or left on the cutting room floor due to time. Long story short, Cobra Kai has now gotten way too big for its own good. But don't get me wrong, the fact that it managed to remain as consistent as it is the reason why the show has actually been so well in the first place. Now, would I say this season 4 is my favorite of the season? Well, debatable, honestly, because every season has their moments, no matter how you want to spice it. But with season 5 fast approaching, and I do mean fast approaching, it seems like only now is the time to, once again, go over my favorite moments of this particular season. So, without further ado, and with no more delays, this is my top 10 moments of season 4 from Cobra Kai. Number 10, those stubborn old farts. Yes, just like so many other people who watched this season, Johnny and Daniel's rivalry is the controversial needle in the haystack that came so very close to dragging the rest of the season down. What was once entertaining fun banter between two old rivals who don't know how to grow up has now gotten so aggressively annoying that had I not understood the reasons for breaking them up in the first place, it would have actively ruined the season for me. To be fair, it already rendered the final episode of the third season obsolete, but this was at a more severely damaging level. I mean, it's one thing if Amanda and Carmen couldn't bring them together, but if freaking Allie couldn't bring them back together, then there was no hope. But it turns out there was, and that is where the reasons for the breakup come into play. As I mentioned before, one of the best things about this show is how, even with your certified heroes and villains, everybody is given a gray area to where switching alliances are almost guaranteed. Johnny is a common catalyst for where our alliances mostly lie in the show, and episode 4 is where we get a little bit deeper through Johnny's skin. His own pops left him when he was very young, and his mom remarried Sid, thinking riches would help them out. As we saw in the aftermath, it didn't. Such a simple but damaging revelation. He's still a child deep down who just wants to be accepted and loved for what he wants to do. That ongoing desolate need to have someone love him properly follow him into adolescence and adulthood only worsened when Daniel first came into his life, and then on it became a collective cycle of him continuously embarrassing him and stealing his girl, his trophy, his win, his fame, his dojo, some of his students, and even his own son eventually. So you can't exactly blame him for getting jealous over Daniel getting close to Miguel under the guy that he could steal his other son. I mean, a little kid inside a grown man's body, so desperate in finding the father figure he never had, becomes the father figure that Miguel wishes he had, and it's one of those scenarios where trying too hard to prevent something just pushes them away even further. Daniel's entire deal is strictly on Terry Silver knocking him severely off balance, kind of ironic. As much as we trash on Karate Kid 3, and rightfully so, Silver's plan against Daniel and Mr. Miyagi was actually bloody brilliant, enticing Daniel to boil his hot-headed nature up to 11, turning him into arguably a more extreme version of himself. So when you see Sam instigating brawls and name-calling and just getting under people's skin and acting more like Johnny, it's almost a direct parallel to the road he almost went down on, thus the fixation on trying to double down on Miyagi-Do. And that is where the root of the problem comes into play, because they both have good points, but it just has to be about them and not about the kids, to the point where even the kids got sick and tired of pedaling along their bullshit. Not so much a battle between them, but a battle of their egos, like Ali said.
Maybe you recognize parts of yourselves in each other, and maybe you don't always like them.
Sure, they took great pleasure in using the other styles where the situation required it, but the fact that it took Miguel literally re-injuring his back at the tournament to have them get on the same page again and admit their ego screwed everyone over is the supreme moment of too little too late. Johnny being the bigger man and admitting his inferiority complex kicked in at the moment of weakness, while Daniel culminating an entire arc for himself out of just one line from Mr. Miyagi was a nice revelation in a moment where we desperately needed everyone to be okay because Miguel wasn't, but by the time it happened, they both already lost. Now, I'm not by any means justifying the breakup of Miyagi Fang. There could have been other workarounds for the writers to have Johnny and Daniel get on each other's nerves without having them break up again. But then again, I sort of predicted before the season came out that something like this was going to happen eventually. And the very least they do is give me a reason why they're still stuck in their ways outside the usual petty nerd bullshit. And for the most part, they did. All I'm hoping and praying for now is that this rivalry is officially over. Like, for the love of God, please. Number 9, I can't do this name justice.
Whatever, Lapusso.
You know, it's very telling when there's a lot of people out here who hate Sam, and the show writers managed to find a way to make them hate her brother even more. Now that is very, very telling. But it's not entirely without reason. All we do know about Anthony is that he's a spoiled, rotten, cheating little shit biscuit, more concerned about the next combo breaker and Doom Eternal than manifesting any certain decent human compassion.
Lapusso.
And we do continue to keep that mentality throughout most of Season 4, constantly picking on Kenny Payne with some peer pressure included regarding his douchebag friend. It's the usual high school embarrassing bully drama we've seen in a bunch of films and TV shows in the past, but there's, I wouldn't say a spin on it, but we do get a little bit of intrigue regarding Anthony's situation to the entire war. I am aware that some people are salty over him saying he didn't care about Mr. Miyagi, but if I'm gonna be honest, a part of me doesn't blame him, because that helps set up his and Daniel's relationship for the rest of the series, honestly. Just put yourself in his shoes. You've practically been given the Harry Potter effect, right? People already know you before you were born. Imagine being the grandson of somebody great like Albert Einstein or Wolfgang Amadeus or Michael Jordan. Instead of being recognized as your own person, you're constantly living in that shadow. Your identity isn't allowed to blossom because it's constantly being compared to somebody greater. He grew up in a rich and wealthy family and his parents barely gave him the time of day because his sister was the golden child. Even the bloody therapist knew that!
Now, why do you think you love your daughter more than your son?
It's no wonder Anthony lost himself in his video games, because they act as escapism from the real world. You got full control of the environment and the characters in it. You get to write the narrative. That's the level of neglect Anthony has to deal with throughout a good chunk of his life. And more often than not, when a child doesn't get love, they're gonna either shield themselves off from it or they'll look for it elsewhere. Anthony obviously took the latter half to that bargain, which is why he's the asshat we know him as, bowing to peer pressure and blending in with the wrong crowd, always causing trouble, but mostly because he hasn't been offered a chance to do better, and partially because I don't think he thinks he can do better. It's not that he doesn't feel out of the loop, it's just he feels worthless because he isn't like the rest of his family. Alienation is a tough pill to swallow, and I'm glad that the writers at least took the brief time they had to showcase it through the few scenes Anthony was given, while also showcasing just how lenient Daniel and Amanda really were with them. They were the problem in most cases, always letting him get away with everything because, well, I've already really made that clear. This also makes it so satisfying when Daniel finally gets fed up with Anthony's shit and tells him, now we're gonna set up some damn boundaries. You've been abusing our trust for years, so now you gotta get your shit together or else. Luckily, there was a shift in Anthony's behavior afterwards, as he actually started doing chores around the house, and even owned up to his mistakes and apologized to Kenny, as flimsy as it was. But to me, it's the scene where he enters the dojo that struck me. There's a sense of wonder and elation when it came to how he looked at that scroll in that room. And the line that Daniel says to him,
he said that you were gonna be a handful, and that someday you'd also be the one who'd be protecting this family.
They would not put that in there if they didn't have plans for Anthony later on. But enough about Lapusso.
Lapusso.
Let's get to the other half of his coin. Number 8, Hall of Pain. Get it? Hall of Pain, Sean Payne, Kenny Payne, House of Pain, World of Pain. Let's just get this over with. As I mentioned before, the season only just balances itself out between the already established storylines involving the structure of the show and the new ones that pop in for a cup of coffee. Anthony and Devin get their fair share of their set on the spotlight, but by far the only new storyline that had any immediate impact on the overarching plot was the inclusion of Kenny Payne, Sean's younger brother. Violence almost seems crucial to his family's DNA. His dad is away at war, and his brother Sean got sent to juvie because people were stealing from him. Now he's the one getting picked on in school with no one beside him mentally or physically to back him up, so he goes to Cobra Kai thanks to his brother's word, and thanks to some prodding from Robbie, he's able to get a spot on the team. I would explain the rest, but you kind of already know what happens. Payne is another prime example of such a happy-go-lucky kid having his heart tainted by the creative Cobra Kai's principles and being taught by someone who, despite the best intentions, didn't reach the right mental capacity in order to properly train him. Don't worry, I'll get to him later. On one hand, it's warranted that he did go to Cobra Kai first because, like Daniel said, Cobra Kai sells power and confidence, and Kenny needed some of their teachings to find a little bit of power within himself to stand his ground. You can't exactly blame him either, especially after all the abuse he took. The eyebrows start raising once he starts to take Silver's teachings to heart a little bit, from getting more aggressive in his workouts to ambushing Lapusso and his douchebag friends in the library to finally getting his hands on Anthony alone and getting him in trouble. He's shown to have a little flair of psychological warfare within him, similar to Silver, but at that point, he's fully corrupted and has become similar to that of his older brother. If you continue to push someone beyond your limits, more often than not, you're not gonna like what you see. I mean, just look at that smile. Look at that smile. It's obvious that with Kenny attacking Anthony in the locker room, Anthony will follow in his father's footsteps and learning karate and taking it more seriously. And with him becoming a more versatile fighter in Season 5 eventually, not only will Anthony's friends also get lured to Cobra Kai because they're scared of Kenny now, and groups like that will often tend to follow the stronger bully, but the love triangle between him, Kenny, and Leah will also be shoehorned into the rivalry. It's just history repeating itself all over again. But sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes. Number 7, history doesn't repeat itself. I think I speak for everyone when I say John Kreese has often crossed the line between being a villain we love to hate and a villain we hate to love far too many times. The ironclad leash he holds over every single influential decision made by the main characters is a spectacle to behold, but at the end of the day, it brings back a very interesting point. Sometimes you enjoy a story more when you know the villain is right. Sure, being cartoonishly super evil for cartoonishly super evil reasons can be fun and all, but when you can relate to and agree with the what and why the antagonist does what he or she does, you know you grab your audience by the balls. None of the ideologies from either sensei are wrong, but Kreese is the one who has, unfortunately, the more gritty, grounded, realistic approach. It's his executions that make him so loathed. So it was a massive relief when he finally started to show some sympathy and humanity in the last 3 episodes, but it was actually hinted at way before that point, more specifically with his relationship with Tori and Johnny and his flashbacks to Vietnam. Both of them are the closest to what Kreese was before he even founded Cobra Kai. Not having a mother, scraping up what they can to survive, finding love, and then losing that love, and thus crippling their sanity in the process. It's often easy for Kreese to let his guard down around the two of them because they're both younger versions of him, and they understand first and foremost the ideology of what he teaches. You can say he has a measure of respect for Robbie, especially considering what he's been through and how similar he is to his father, but again, I think it's just a means of him trying to get the Johnny in a way. I'm mentioning this because I found it ironic that he's the last one to catch on to what his own teachers have been doing as far as perpetuating the cycle of revenge and heartbreak and trauma, and the odd thing is, even after what he did in the final episode, I wouldn't consider Kreese at this point to be an anti-hero. He's still very much an antagonist. I mean, is Vader any less of a villain for caring about Padme, or Luke, or Leia? Not really, but it does add layers to his character. The same thing applies to Kreese. At least at this moment, Kreese hasn't really shown that his ideology has changed all that much. He was just eaten by a bigger fish that manipulated his weakness in the form of his former friend Terry. Seasons 3 and 4 proved that Kreese always had a heart shriveled up underneath all that Cobra skin, but his way of life just prevented him from having any healthy relationships. And yet with Tori and Johnny, he still opts to try, especially when he finally sees Terry spiraling out of control. That was Kreese's fault, by the way, and how it mirrors all the stuff that he's been doing for the past, no joke, 30 plus years. Silva was a big breakthrough in regards to helping Kreese regain somewhat of a collective consciousness, constantly reminding him that their objective was to turn kids into more confident winners and not rehash mistakes of the past. And even when he does give in to taking Daniel out of the picture, his priority is still focused on the kids. And I want to believe it does eventually get through to Kreese. The fact that he acquiesces to Silver's strategy of waiting out and letting Daniel and Johnny tear each other apart was surprising, but it's a sign of him beginning to lower his defenses. And it isn't until Silver attacks Johnny, thanks to some prodding from him about Vietnam again, that a breakthrough is found. The chef's kiss, however, comes in the final episode where Silver demands Tori cheat to win, and almost immediately Kreese's life just flashes before his very eyes, and that is that he sees not just the worst moment of his career with Johnny, but all the other rivalries and conflicts spewing out because of what he's done. Him and the dojo, Amanda and Tori, Robbie and Johnny, Daniel and Johnny, Robbie and Kenny. Again, this doesn't absolve him of anything he's done, but the fact that he literally admits that he had a moment of sympathy proves Kreese isn't entirely made out of stone. But he's not the only one. Number 6, Uno Reverse. You guys remember in my previous Cobra Kai video where I dissected the dynamic between Sam and Tori, and I sort of defended Sam for most of Season 3 because I felt like it finally gave some color and dimension to her character, and then I said this. Unlike Tori, who would rather continue to try and add more fuel to a fire she started, Sam at least took accountability for her part in the tragedy and tried her damnedest to make things better and put out whatever flames she could. I'm just glad that after 2 straight seasons of her being treated like a drama magnet, Sam was actually allowed to be, you know, a real character. Well, hold up, let me work it, put my thing down for a bit and reverse it, because while the dynamic is still largely at play, the roles here have mostly been reversed. Sam is now the one taking a more aggressive approach to her tactics, as if she hasn't already been aggressive enough, and Tori is the one actually starting to find some balance within herself. One of my favorite parts about this series is how they managed to take a seemingly clear-cut perspective from the original movies and integrate a little bit of gray area into both sides. Whether being aggressive or finding balance ropes for the person depends on who they are, and it's like Robbie said.
Truth is, it doesn't matter which way you fight as long as it works.
As it turns out, the styles they were told to never deviate towards seem to be doing them a lot of favors. I already mentioned Sam acting like a brat earlier with the name calling and cutting off and getting in people's faces, but this comes as her trying to free herself from her father's rather protective but understandable influences. Sure, his lessons did wonders for her and her friends, but with everything on the line, she sees Johnny's more aggressive style as more liberating, finding more freedom and balance in both styles to however she sees fit, but also being more vocal and expressing herself often. She's been taught since childhood that Miyagi-Do was the only right way to learn karate, to protect yourself, to defend yourself. But the last 2 seasons reminded Sam that trying to avoid the fight and staying on defense won't help her for long. Despite constantly being on the fence between both sides, she needed Johnny's mentality of striking first to embrace the fact that it isn't all that bad. The latter is obviously what Daniel has a problem with, as I mentioned earlier. But that doesn't stop Sam from trying to prove to him that there's more than one way to get things done, something that even Robbie told him too. But I find her arc satisfying here because similar to Season 3, it's addressing her issues directly, by this time putting her firmly into the other shoe. The show writers know that she's insufferable, so they condense her down just enough to where you can still get her anger being justified since the very existence of Tori caused her to be so miserable. Speaking of Tori, she was honestly this close to becoming another Saturday morning cartoon villain caricature. Her reasonings were always understandable from the get-go, but her acting like a kill-crazy psycho half the time tainted my ability to properly relate to her what it called for, and believe me, I really wanted to root for her. My prayers were eventually answered, but it sure took a sweet time to get to that point, because she was still determined to get back at Sam at the tournament, at least until Amanda of all people came into play. She had every intention on literally locking this girl up for straight up trying to kill her daughter, but the realization of Tori's home and work life sparked an epiphany, reminding her of when she was in the same position. So she desperately tries to reach out to her to remind her that while yes, the world is terrifying, cruel, and unfair, it isn't out to get her. And no sooner does Tori realize that, when she literally has nowhere else to go. With the wings finally clipped and her back against the wall, she's forced to ask Amanda for help, and despite her allegiance to Cobra Kai, her attitude does shift significantly for the rest of the season. She starts to become more open and personal to the people around her, refrains from starting fights by any means, and even tried to... Well, I wouldn't say tried to. I can assume she was going to apologize to Sam for everything as he did to her before she got cut off. She even goes so far as to show concern for her after she wins the All Valley, and Sam is both perplexed and confused by this. She actually starts to try and be the bigger person in a rivalry, and her connection to Amanda helps ground her scenario to where if you don't understand her before, it's impossible to ignore now. If Kreese helps feed off her natural impulses and break the mirror in front of her, Amanda forces Tori to take a good long look at herself in that mirror and make her reflect on the choices she's made. It's even helped blossom her relationship with Robbie on top of finally being able to open herself up to him and confide in a semi-stable relationship that actually works and has genuine chemistry. Season 4 added more layers to Sam's character for the rest of the series, while also doing the Tori what Season 3 did to Sam also, flesh her out and give her a leg to stand on as a major player going forward. Now while the rivalry between Sam and Tori is far from over, it appears that their animosity is slowly dissolving to the point where I can reasonably see those two putting their differences aside in the next season. But they're not the only ones who have big plans. Number 5, breaking a champion. It seems that no matter where I look, I'm seeing multiple Cobra Kai videos bombarded with, oh, Miguel's ruined, oh, there goes my favorite character, can't believe they did my boy dirty like that.
Look how they massacred my boy.
This entry will be me coming to Miguel's defense, because while this arc wasn't my boy's best, it was arguably a close second, and a major prelude to what's to come next season. To say Miguel has not been on a roller coaster for most of the series is a gross understatement. For being a shy, timid kid with asthma, seriously, how Johnny cured that I will never understand, to being Cobra Kai's top student and being corrupted by his principles, to nearly being broken beyond repair and having to constantly fight back just to literally walk again, his contributions to the ongoing karate war with Johnny, Daniel, and Kreese cannot go unfounded. Miguel has really been that big of a help and that big of a draw for this series. But in Season 4, he found himself on the receiving end of a struggle potentially more difficult than his back could have ever given him. Thoughts on the future? Between burdened expectations on where he's going to go in life, his missing father still rehabilitated from his back injury, and the ensuing karate drama that keeps butting into his life and complicating his relationships, this was a growing pain season for Miguel, similar to that of Robbie's back in Season 3. But unlike Robbie, I don't think the writers meant to put Miguel on the back burner on purpose, but they saw the potential with him still not being at his best and being mentally held back, so they just ran with it. I know Miguel literally said he needed to prove that he can make it to the All Valley and win it again, and the fact that he literally got up to near the end at less than 60% shows how resilient this man really is. But at the end of the day, the trophy, the karates, the lessons, it finally got to a point where he just couldn't care less about them anymore. First it was Johnny and Daniel butting heads again, then it was Johnny getting jealous of him learning Miyagi-Do, and just when things couldn't get any weirder, the sensei who acted like a father figure to him is revealed to be dating his mother. Miguel has always sort of been this anchor towards most of Johnny's decisions, but he also proves to be like his mistress or second wife at the exact moment when the man she loves cries out the name of his ex or first wife in the middle of their lovemaking. Now he's stuck between two rocks and a million other hard places with no semblance of control over how he wants to be presented, and he feels like now everybody's just using him to get what they want, inadvertently stepping into Robbie's shoes a little bit. The big moment, however, comes near the end of episode 8 after the after prom showdown. Johnny just got his ass kicked by Silver and Miguel has to help him to bed, and what follows is this beautifully acted scene between the comically drunken Johnny and emotionally wounded Miguel. It's both tragically poignant and hilariously awkward at the same time as the two just exchange awkward conversation with one another while one is clearly out of it. And in this sequence is when Johnny tells Miguel how badly he wants to be there for him, how much he actually wants to be a father to him. It's emotionally harrowing, but heartwarming at the same time. And when those final few seconds unfold,
I love you. I love you too, Robbie.
talk about the ultimate betrayal. You can see the exact moment in which Miguel's heart lodges up into his throat, and props to Zola for acting his ass off and making us feel the heartbreak and tension in this moment, thinking we can confide in Johnny and just having it all crash down on him in an instant. To be fair, Miguel already knew that he was being used as Johnny's second chance to make up for his wrongdoings, but up until now, he didn't really care. There's no question that karate helped him a big deal regarding his confidence and helping him form bonds that he'll treasure for the rest of his life, but he was never able to forge out his own path or find his own passion from the moment he was born, and it wasn't until this season came along where that moral epiphany on just what the hell he's doing finally dawned on him. So many things were changing around him and he hardly had any control over it, to the point where when he finally did get an out, he took it the first opportunity he got. The trophy wasn't what defined him. It never was going to be what defined him. What mattered to him more was the determination and hard work he put down to get to that destination, because that's what made the journey worth it. His journey was so full of so many bumps and curves and twists and emotional complications here that Miguel simply couldn't keep himself balanced, and him tearing his back again was the straw that broke No, I'm not going to go there. Let's just say it was the final nail in the coffin. So he feels like the only way he can find himself again is to find his father and where he came from. Similar to Tori, his arc is perhaps the most unpredictable going forward in this series, but a part of me is tempted to say that Miguel used the Find My Father front as exactly that, a front just to get away from all the petty karate stuff because it ruined his life so much. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the latter, but all signs are pointing towards the former, and regardless, I'm interested to see where that goes to. It's like Daniel said, his path isn't a straight line, it's still being written. And that unfortunately is how things go in this life. You break one champion, and number 4, you crown a new one. Hawk's return to the light was not just one of my personal favorite highlights of Season 3, but it's possibly one of my favorite moments from the entire Karate Kid series as a whole. From also being a side-typic kid to completely shedding his skin and being a new person entirely, to finally coming back to the light, Hawk has been in a literal self-discovery arc for most of the entire series, and only now has it finally reached its satisfying conclusion. I'm just gonna jump straight right into it because man was this a joy to watch unfold. I can definitely imagine it being somewhat hard for Hawk to leave Cobra Kai behind ever since being there from the beginning. Sort of. I already mentioned that bit with confidence and selling power before, but for Hawk, I think it was more about wringing control over his own narrative. No wonder he took such a literal approach to flipping the script. It was the first time in his life he ever really found a measure of power and control over his life, so of course he was going to spiral out of control and turn heel if it meant he could keep that same level of control and not lose the spotlight. But thanks to lingering self-doubt and Chris's Cobra Kai not returning their share of loyalty, he woke up. But Hawk's turn wasn't sudden and light. He was constantly questioning his decisions and his standpoint from the beginning. It was always peer pressure and his misplaced loyalty to Miguel that led to Amy's aggression to Miyagi-Do. When he realized that his enemy was right next to him the whole time and that his real deal friends were in front of him getting hurt, he realized he was fighting for the wrong reasons and for the wrong people. But what I like even more than that is the fact that they didn't make his redemption an automatic one. He had to earn it. He did burn bridges with practically everybody there, and it was going to take a long time for anybody to fully trust him. But turns out that didn't really happen until he had to lose his mohawk, or more specifically, he got it shaved off with a scalpel. His confidence rocked, he quit karate, losing his sense of pride in self, and even going so far to admit that he deserved it because of what he put everyone else through recently. However, Hawk doesn't stay away from the fray for long. He does come back once he thinks to prod him from his binary brother, and partially due to his pseudo-fascination with the lore of Miyagi-Do. And it's that combination of powerful depth and impulsive flexibility as a fighter where Eli was able to strike a balance, finally defeating Robbie and giving him both the win and closure he needed. Him making the shift over from Eagle Fang to Miyagi-Do was a nice move, because after the rampage he went on in the previous 2 seasons, Eli needed a drastic shift in balance and direction within himself to fully become whole again. The principles of Miyagi-Do allowed such philosophical teachings to blossom within the individual while helping them discover or rediscover the confidence with the maturity they develop alongside it. It did wonders for Dimitri, his self-esteem growing massively by the end of the 2nd season. Robbie definitely improved for the first 2 seasons, becoming a massively different person than when we first saw him. Seeing that gradual development for Eli would have made his eventual victory at the Off Valley a lot more emotionally poignant. As is, it's perhaps the biggest missed opportunity for his character yet, not getting to see him gradually make that transition and adapt to the Miyagi style of learning, and how his fascination with Miyagi's teachings helped him more than expected. Now, I don't think Moon giving Eli his confidence back was cheap in a way, considering he made it up to as far as he did, but it shows that even when he did have the Hawk, Moon saw what was influencing his behavior and hoped that he'd get back on track at some point. Same with Dimitri. At least someone was actually able to believe in him from the beginning despite the relationship being strained, and at the end of the day, he finally realized who he was.
You guys didn't win this whole fucking thing.
And when he did. Number 3, the Solo Valley. Now, in some ways, the tournament that was hyped up as being the most important thing to happen yet in the series did feel a little small in scale and second fiddle due to COVID restrictions and the bludgeoning of other storylines overtaking it. Also, yes, I can definitely understand some people being disappointed with the build-up because this should have been the season where they put more of an emphasis on what it meant for the future as well as the people participating. This honestly should have been the darkest season yet, and while it was, the build-up to the tournament didn't really feel like it. But in my opinion, I'd like to argue that it did. The best way I can describe it is comparing it to the 2001 Royal Rumble match. It isn't terribly shocking in terms of a winner, grueling tales of endurance, or featuring any groundbreaking returns or revelations, with the exception of a couple. It is, however, the tournament that features everything. Comedy, drama, suspense, cheesiness sipping out of every corner with a little bit of cringe, team psychology at its finest, and long-term storytelling finally paying off for several major characters. Most of the qualities that made the first tournament memorable are amplified here, making this one of the most binge-watchable events to go down in the entire history of the series. Things started out as well as they could have in the beginning, with Miyagi Fang taking the early lead in skills competition, but multiple fumbles in the later half gave Cobra Kai the edge they needed to not only get ahead, but to dominate early on. Things remained more or less the same when the actual fighting started, thanks in part to Robbie spilling Miyagi's secret techniques to his team and preparing them in advance for weeks. This obviously doesn't sit well with Daniel, so he decides to give Robbie one last lesson for the road.
Never put passion in front of principle, because even if you win, you lose.
Despite that lesson, Robbie's hatred for him and his father ran too deep, leading to him pulverizing Kenny in the most uncountable manner possible, all while the revived Hawk absolutely buried Kylo in front of everyone. Devin falls short up against Tori, meaning Eagle Fang's chances at a female champion are done and dusted. The only way they got a chance at getting ahead and winning the whole thing is Miguel. He gets off to a very impressive start, but then Johnny is quick to admit that he let Miguel down when he forfeited, but Daniel doesn't even allow any of his students to switch up styles until literally when they have no other choice. The kids definitely take note of the teachings, especially when Hawk used that combined balance to beat Robbie and dethrone Miguel as men's champion, but neither Johnny or Daniel fully came to immerse and accept the others' teachings until Miyagi barely makes it to the finals. Again, by that point, it was too little too late. Despite Miyagi Fang's best efforts and Sam going full Tekken on Tori, Cobra Kai was barely able to squeeze in their second victory, and Tori was finally able to get a legitimate win for the first time in her life. At least she thought she did until discovering that Terry was literally up to his old tricks and paid off the ref, tainting her victory. Outside of putting most of the central players in a precarious position to where we were heavily conflicted on who we even wanted to win, the 2-episode plot structure allowed for most of the events to flow naturally and take their time, instead of putting all the major players in positions they have to be or deserve to be for the upcoming season. Miyagi Fang's lack of organization and balance cost him greatly at the end of the line despite bouncing back at the last possible minute. I know they made it look like a very close race, because it was, but having Cobra Kai win was the absolute right choice here. Now we get to have a Infinity War-like showdown with more doom approaching, especially since most of the characters and the tournament have something being taken away from them, as well as earning something back. Johnny lost one son, but got another back. Daniel lost the tournament, but he finally ended the rivalry. Sam lost her win, but got her father's approval. Tori got her win, but lost her credibility in earning it. Kenny got his revenge, but is losing his humanity in the process. Miguel lost his championship, but is getting clarity on what he really wants to do more in his life. Chris won the whole thing and regained some of his humanity, but lost his position as head honcho at the dojo, all while Silver took off from him right underneath his nose. The tournament may not have had that looming ambience of doomsday like the previous season, and what I hope we're gonna get next season, but the ending of the 9th episode and the final episode that followed sorta made up for that. And it's more or less all thanks to number 2, Quicksilver. Literally every single scene with Terry Silver in it, Ian Thomas Griffith turned it into absolute gold. Arguably the best part of Karate Kid Part 3, there's something so devilishly charismatic and over the top regarding his mannerisms and how his mind works, but the psychological flair he adds and the pull he holds over the events of this series proves that while he is canonically the secondary antagonist of the franchise, he's considered by many, including myself, to be the true villain, the most dangerous, twisted, sadistic, and cutting villain in the entire Karate Kid franchise. What I find the most compelling about Terry's return to the phrase that despite what I'm about to discuss later, he is pretty much a perfect amalgamation of what most modern villains are missing these days, and while I appreciate modern fiction really exploring the psychology of villainy and moral greatness, sometimes that just makes these larger-than-life, I do it for me, can't help but love him type of antagonists stand out even more. He's a Machiavellian type of character that loves his old bad ways, in other terms, manipulating and deceiving everyone with a sadistic, mischievous smile, always ready to be deployed. He knows he's bad, he has fun being bad, and he damn sure loves being bad. But that doesn't mean he's above trying to go for a face turn. And that's what makes his fall from grace all the more tragic, honestly. Even after getting himself in therapy and having a girlfriend, I believe, he still felt the need to get back into karate after all the time away clearing his mind and getting himself fixed. Like I mentioned before, he wanted to finish what he and Kreese started by molding people into better versions of themselves, taking that fear and using that as a weapon to better themselves. But Kreese just had to be Kreese, emotionally blackmailing him and holding Vietnam over his head for decades like a noose around his neck. I think what hurt Terry the most regarding his friend's hypocrisy is the cold realization that Kreese never wanted to work with him in the first place. He wanted to get back with Johnny, so when he was spurned for Daniel at the end of Season 3, this created jealousy within Kreese to get back with his former star pupil. For all this talk of loyalty and finishing what they started as young man, Terry never meant nearly as much to Kreese as Johnny did, and that had to be the biggest punch in the gut for Silver. To be emotionally abused like this by a supposed friend who had long since been taken him for granted and cared more about petty squabbles than his own friendship, of course it would drive anybody back to substance abuse. Kreese created his own trauma and gave the Valley a bigger monster than he could ever control. As sad as it is to see someone like him try and do good and then go right back to the dark side, I cannot wait for the coked up Terry to return to his own tricks. Without the need to seek Kreese's approval, the lengths that he'll go to get what he wants are boundless, and is guaranteed to mold Cobra Kai Season 5 into the Infinity War of the series. Even better, all the major players are in position for this showdown of epic proportions. Especially this one troubled, mortally scared, lost, and guilt-ridden kid still trying to get his life together. And I think you know where this goes next. Number 1, coming home. The long-term arc is finally starting to come around for Robbie Keene, and the fans are finally starting to take notice of that ongoing domino effect. It's been such a long time coming since it started at the beginning of the series, and it warms my heart to finally say, Robbie's come home. For anybody who's watched the show up to now, you already know most of his story and how it plays out, but the way he changes through the season but stays consistent with his character was so cleverly implemented, it's really hard to deny that he's quickly become a fan favorite. Similar to Tori, if you can't bring yourself to like him, the least you can do is try and put yourself in his shoes to relate to his struggles. As the Zuko of the show, the emotional turmoil he goes through as opposed to a straight good guy or bad guy is relatable, grounded, even down to earth in some ways, and Tanner Buchanan makes every emotional beat of Robbie's story feel human and real as it could. Ever since the end of Season 2 up to now, Robbie has more or less allowed the old resentment over his perceived betrayals at the hands of those he came to trust and the overall state of his life to resurface. The lessons taught to him didn't work in prison, and the people who were supposed to look out for him, either intentionally or otherwise, turned the other direction. So of course, Kreese was going to step right in and nudge Robbie at the door into striking first and channeling his rage. While it definitely worked, I think Robbie was aware that this wasn't permanent. As perhaps the most morally conflicted character in the series, he was somewhat aware that drowning himself in his anger and rage for Johnny and Daniel was going to poison him. This is why he took such calculated measures into training Kenny, as he sees a lot of himself in him. But between that and trying to finish what Cobra Kai started by getting back at the people who let him down, teaching these lessons, rechanneled his rage, and history ended up repeating itself. One thing to keep in mind about Robbie's behavior is that contrary to most of what he says, his motivations mostly align with what Anthony's entire deal is. Again, when a child doesn't get love, they'll either block themselves off or they'll do anything for it, even if it means looking for it in all the wrong places. We've seen it multiple times in rapid succession. He comes off with this delinquent-like aura of someone who doesn't care about rules or have people's interests at heart, but the moment someone treats him with genuine compassion and takes care of him, he turns around almost immediately, and that was practically all Robbie needed. Love. It was never about war or Kreese or the soul of the valley or none of this karate gang warfare, because he never cared about that. He just wanted his father, or more specifically, someone to take him in and treat him like he mattered for more than a second. But the thing he feared the most was that when he messed up, if he messed up, he was going to end up like his father, down on his luck, stripped of his identity and integrity, and unfortunately that's what happened here, thanks to Kenny. The irony in that, of teaching Cobra Kai the Miyagi-Do techniques and eventually corrupting Kenny in the process, is that eventually it did force Daniel and Johnny to admit that one style and one way of thinking wasn't enough. He actually did them a favor by forcing them to try and become more versatile and strong together. And yet while they were busy tearing each other apart, he was tearing himself apart also, because that tactic of bleeding and leading into the Cobra Kai no mercy mantra, turning Kenny into almost an exact replica of Robbie himself. Bitter, angry, and spiteful, fully endorsing those principles because he had nowhere else to go also. Considering he's been at odds with his position the entire series, the revelation that he helped prolong this Cobra Kai Miyagi rivalry not only gives Robbie that extra perception needed to dissect the whole story from the outside looking in, but it allows him to see that, well, his father and everyone else is responsible for about a good 90-95% of the conflict he's a part of. He's not absolved of any wrongdoings either. Outside of nearly crippling his dad's adopted son for life, the person he was trading scarred his former mentor's son for life, thus perpetuating and continuing the cycle of revenge that he and everyone else got dragged along into. Like literally looking at his dark half radiate to life in front of him, Robbie's now left face to face with the reality that he is like his father, and it takes until literally walking a mile within Johnny's shoes to realize just how right he was about some of what he was trying to warn him about. And that was always the root of the problem for Robbie. Balance. He is, in my opinion, the most skilled fighter amongst all the kids outside of Miguel, but when his anger consumes him, he doesn't really take any wins from that. The school fight, he's enraged and loses focus. The fight with his dad, he's enraged and loses focus and loses to the locker room. In the tournament, he is again enraged and loses focus, but he's also uncertain and at odds with just what the hell he's doing. As a firm believer of the term, what goes around comes around, he firmly believed he was the one in control of his own destiny, thus his persistent promise that he was not going to be anybody's pawn anymore. Yet it was that ravaging indecision that led him putting passion in front of principle, and now he's paying the price for that. It all finally comes to a head at the old dojo. Robbie has clearly hit rock bottom. He's now realized that channeling his jealousy and hate only created another bully, and that mostly everything his dad and Daniel tried to warn him about has come true. He has now become what his father was after losing to Daniel at the All Valley, and fears he's not going to change or get better. Johnny disagrees, telling him that he's to blame for where he is right now, and arguably so. But then, Robbie surprises him.
I'm sick of blaming you, Dad.
I'm sick of blaming you, Dad. That is genuine character growth. He's done trying to blame his father or his shortcomings or everybody else in his life for his problems. It's the first time, the only time, he actively admits that he needs his father, someone, anyone, to try and comfort him in this time of anguish. And for once, Johnny doesn't screw it up. Now, for people saying the reconciliation between him and Johnny didn't work because it wasn't earned, considering Johnny didn't do much for Robbie this season, I say, what really makes you think that? Sure, he didn't really do much for him this season, but again, him being with Miguel was constantly teaching him better ways to be a better father and teacher, so by the time this moment did finally come, he knew what to say and how to go about it. And for Robbie, it's not so much about forgiving his father as it is taking accountability for his own faults and trying to forgive himself. Now, similar to Hawk, the next season will officially kickstart his long-awaited redemption, and what better way to do that than to head over down to Mexico with his father to help get back his stepbrother Miguel and make amends. In doing this, he also ends up proving Sam right. He will in some ways be the glue that'll bring everybody together to help fend off against Cobra Kai, and considering William Zabka himself stated that Season 5 was his favorite, I think that's a pretty telling sign as to where this is gonna go next. I think the best way to describe Season 4 is something like this. The first season, or stage, boasted the introduction and reintroduction of new and old. The second one capped off with a lot of flair and spectacle despite some hokey writing. Third stage, or season, was strictly on character growth and change. The fourth stage, season, marks itself as a season primarily honed in around transitioning and accountability. The finale leaves a lot of room for uncharted territory and new places for the series to explore for the rest of the series, and I, for one, cannot bloody wait. This series has been going on for well over 5 freaking seasons, and it still somehow managed to be as good as it was when it first came out. Now that is a rarity if I've ever seen it, honestly. Seriously, Season 5 cannot come fast enough. Bring it on!